increasingly the word sustainability to me, for a long time I did a bunch of the defining that a lot of people do, where they're like, okay, we're going to define it first environmentally, and then we're going to define it socially, and then we're going to sort of spread it out to more and more things, and we're going to get a more and more complex definition that fits everything in it. And increasingly I feel like I want to define sustainability not narrowly, but very bluntly, by saying, can this be sustained going forward, or is this going to produce irrevocable breakdown? If it's going to, if this is going to cause the collapse of a system, then it's not sustainable, and we can just use that.
In some ways, sustainability means everything, but in the other ways, it still has a very kind of limited definition to what it means. I think our field, like what I do with Alarm, is so much about community sustainability. It's about elevating people's voices that have consistently been unheard.
And I think it's definitely a state of mind and like a way of thinking about consumption patterns and how we, living in like a capitalist society, deal with material and the natural environment. And so I like to think of my sustainability as like almost a way of being. I think sustainability is more of a mindset than a practice, definitely. Because once you change your mindset, it becomes habitual rather than something you have to practice,
For me, I didn't really understand sustainability until I got to Dickinson. To me, it felt like something that like white, affluent people were involved in just because they had this sort of distance from economic necessity that allowed them to occupy their minds with other with other spaces, other things, such as sustainability. Well, I think for me, at the most basic level, you can't build a sustainable community if you have these social inequalities within a higher or overarching system.
And I don't know, I think it's also about sharing resources that you have with others to make sure everyone else is on the same page and feels loved in order to perpetuate these behaviors that eventually will lead to some type of paradigm shift in society.
So I wanted to use the material of plastic because it's really useful in ceramics also in keeping clay hydrated to keep building, but I wanted to sort of showcase it as the primary material in creating these tapestries. Do you want me to show you? Nets out of a nylon cord and then tie the plastic onto them. And then I was interested in making a whole room installation with these tapestries so that becomes like a synthetic environment, but also maybe a bit attractive or curious, so people might stop and think about what is contributing to our environment, or what do we fill our homes with, or what are our spaces like. And
I mean, coming to Dickinson, I knew that I wanted to study environmental science and Spanish. Didn't end up doing either of those things because I didn't really feel seen in either of those departments. I don't know if I really feel seen in any of the departments I'm involved in now, but I do feel like I have a voice. And that is really important to me in terms of social sustainability, because if you feel important enough to speak and to share your opinions, that helps other people do the same thing.
I feel like something that really still to this day at Dickinson that bothers me about the environmental science department is that it's very white. And so a lot of the times they don't actually talk about environmental racism or the intersections of social sustainability and environmental sustainability unless they're using this sort of enslavement framework to advocate for the freedom of animal cruelty. And so it's like they only see our humanity in comparison to animals. And what does that do for the psyche of Black environmentalists when they're engaging in these conversations?
Privilege going to a liberal arts education, and oftentimes there are things that people do sustainability wise where that can't necessarily, it would be great if it could be, but that can't necessarily be taken to the societal standard yet, because there's just certain demographics and parts of our hierarchy that can't access it. And until that has kind of been overcome, And until, like, I don't know, maybe a place like Dickinson is a great way to help start overcoming that, because there are so many people within this community that are from different demographics and different spaces. So that's a good platform to introduce new topics. Like, I feel like a very common example that I can think of is like veganism, or like choosing a certain sort of diet that deviates from like what's most easily accessible to us, which is like dairy, meat. So even just like acknowledging that factor where it's like, yes, it's ideal if we all live this way, but until it's made accessible to everyone in certain ways, like.
Or sometimes you do feel like you're like, what can I do? Because we talk about, oh, there's this standing in your way, there's this standing in your way. You also have to, it's not just individual, but overall broad changes that need to happen. So you're kind of like, what should I do?
I found that I was doing in my environmental history classes what a lot of people do, I think, which is I was laying out the history of environmental problems kind of repeatedly over and over again. Increasingly, I'm interested in thinking about how we might talk about responding to those problems, and how we might be mischaracterizing the past by only talking about multiplying problems instead of talking about interacting solutions. And the other thing I encourage students to do is, instead of imagining themselves alone, trying to come up with solutions in the last paragraph, I want them to do two things. I want them to imagine solutions where they're not alone, since actually there are a lot of people trying to do this work. And you can do a lot more things if you imagine yourself, not just like, is it me alone sending a letter to my congressman or turning off a light or whatever. If you imagine yourself like acting collectively with other people. And then I also want them, instead of when people are looking for solutions, to kind of imagine a future as though they're the first person imagining it. I want them to survey the groups of people who are already working towards this. Because there are lots of those people.
The thing that gives me hope is that there is this web of a lot of strong expertise and will and effort that, when stitched together, can be really strong and powerful.
You know, we all, one way or another, have to put bread on the table, like, or it's gluten-free bread, or rice, whatever. That economic issues are need to be considered when you're looking at sustainability, and so. What's exciting though is that you could look at like a green energy economy as a win-win situation where there are jobs in the green energy industry. We could spend a lot of public money building big solar fields rather than building pipelines, and for a more sustainable energy source. So there are solutions that aren't like jobs versus the environment, but jobs and the environment.
I think the movement towards sustainability, specifically in the West, is what makes me more excited, because I think we can learn a lot from other countries, especially underdeveloped countries, because there are people out there doing very genius things,